There are a ton of books out there today that talk about the different ways of managing change in your organization. So why is it so hard?
We often talk about driving action inside an organization. How do we get people to act in a way that supports the change we're trying to direct so that we deliver a better customer experience? And customer experience professionals have struggled with the topic of driving action for some time.
We're going to talk about effectively managing change and how that can make or break your CX program on this episode of the CX Leader Podcast.
The CX Leader Podcast with Steve Walker is produced by Walker, a business consulting firm that helps our clients unlock the potential of their customer experiences by placing the customer at the heart of all their business decisions. You can find out more at walkerinfo.com.
Hello again, everybody. This is Steve Walker, Chairman and CEO of Walker Information, and also host of the CX Leader Podcast, your source for all the things that CX leaders need to develop professionally and make sure that your CX program is delivering all the value for your company and your customers. Go to Amazon.com and search for change management in the book section, and you'll get a result list of over 20,000 items. Lots of people have written on the subject, yet it's still a difficult concept to grasp within a business. And in CX, the ability to affect change to improve how your customers experience your company is vital. So for the next 3 episodes, we're going to explore this topic of change management. And to start us down this road is Noah Grayson, a Vice President, Certified Customer Experience Professional here at Walker. Noah, thanks for being back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Noah, this is a topic I know that you know a lot about and something that you're passionate about. From your perspective, what is it about change management and why is it relevant for the CX professional?
Well, let's define what change management means, because I think we all may have different impressions or different definitions that run through our heads. So when we talk about change management, the way I think about it is it really means coordinating a transition in a way that gets lasting change. And specifically for CX professionals, it's about creating lasting change in the ways customers experience an organization. Okay, so definitionally, that's how I think about change management, creating change that lasts and generates positive outcomes.
What parts of the process are the hardest for a CX pro? Or where do we see that show up and why is this so important to CX pros?
Well, I think for customer experience professionals, we often talk about driving action inside an organization. How do we get people to act in a way that supports the change we're trying to direct so that we deliver a better customer experience? And customer experience professionals have struggled with the topic of driving action for some time. And I think that is multifaceted. But even most recently, as we explored the topic in our study, A Progress Report to 2020, we found that most customer experience professionals still struggle with getting functional parts of the organization to take action. I think the one function we found to be most effective is customer support. But there, only about 50% of customer experience professionals report that function effectively takes action. All the other functions in the business, it drops down to about a third who are really effective at making change to positively impact the customer experience. And you alluded to the fact that there were 20,000 books on Amazon, but we all have one that we like, that we go back to, that we use as a guide when we have to direct some change. And one I like is a book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath.
Yep.
And the subtitle of Switch is How to Change Things When Change is Hard. And there are 3 elements of change that they talk about, or components that they talk about having to effectively be managed in order for change to occur. And those 3 things that they discuss are really wrapped around in a metaphor that was coined in the book, The Happiness Hypothesis. And the metaphor is a rider and elephant metaphor. And so they wrap the components of change around this specific metaphor. And if you think about it, the rider, is indicative of one of the components of change, and that's the rational side of us, the one that has to analyze and understand in order for us to comprehend and want to change. The elephant is the emotion. You know, the rider has limited willpower to move the elephant where it needs to go. But when you drive change, you have to manage both the rational and the emotional. And then the third component is the situational. And if you think about the rider on back of the elephant heading down a path, the situational element of change is the path. And so when you're effectively trying to get people to change or to change a situation, you have to manage those three components of change. And so I think a lot of times the struggle with customer experience professionals, Steve, is we spend a lot of our time and energy on the rational.
Noah, you offered a lot of things, but I got to go back to this thing about literally customer support is the best at changing, and they're only doing it about half the time successfully.
That's right. That's what we found in our recent study.
And I guess if I had to hypothesize, customer support ends up being the kind of the end of the line for a customer issue.
Absolutely.
Therefore, they are probably the most motivated to try to drive change.
Exactly.
What is the inertia that goes on in the other aspects of the organization?
Well, I think there are lots of components. I think when we talk about those three elements of change, I don't think customer experience professionals do a good job necessarily on two of the elements. I think we're really good on the rational side. We present a lot of data. We analyze the case. Yep. We try to make it effectively. But we don't appeal to the emotional side, the elephant. And we are not going to move the needle solely by appealing to the rational. We also have to appeal to the emotional side. And I think customer experience professionals aren't necessarily effective at that. Not to say that all aren't, but I say it's an opportunity for improvement for most. The other is the situational side.
Yeah, how's that factor in then?
So, we are, again, good at presenting the data, making the case for where there's opportunity for improvement and why it should be made, but we don't necessarily go deep enough then to direct that change by telling them how the situation should evolve. Okay, so I think lots of customer experience professionals stop at making the case, but they don't take the next step in really getting the group together to define what the actual change should be in order to improve the experience. And I think that's where the CX profession needs to evolve to take the next step, is going just from those who bring an insight to those who are directing meaningful change and helping the situation to evolve so that people can act in different ways.
Is there also an aspect of the situational where we, as pros, we might want to try to take advantage of a situation where perhaps we inject after there's been dissatisfaction or there's been a disappointing experience?
Yeah, I think a wise business professional once told me, never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
And a good crisis is a perfect opportunity or motivation to make some meaningful change. So yeah, you got to capitalize on that when the opportunity presents itself. I think it's often a great opportunity for improvement. And that's often how we try to use insights we collect and analyze and present around the customer experiences where there are deficiencies, in the experience. And we try to leverage that as the motivation to drive change, but we spend too much of our time focused on the analytical and not enough time focused on the emotional and the situational.
Yeah, I think that is a great swing thought for our listeners, that if you're wanting to be effective in the change management, maybe just inventory how much of your own activity is going into those three buckets. And you're probably right. We need to shift some out of the analytical into the emotional and the situational. Or, maybe a practical example might be, not just wait for your monthly or quarterly report out. Be out there actively looking and seeking and finding the stories to appeal to the emotional side, and actually get in there and look at some situations where there is customer stress and customer irritation.
Right. Sometimes simple wins can come from just changing the situation. There's a great story in Switch, and I'll paraphrase the story a bit, but there was a study of irrational eating behavior. And researchers found that participants consumed 53% more stale popcorn when given a larger container. Okay? And so what they concluded was, hey, that in order to reduce popcorn consumption, just give out smaller containers. And effectively changing behavior was simply focused on just changing that situation.
Yeah.
That path. Just give them a smaller container. They'll eat less.
Yeah.
It wasn't because of people issues. It's because we're dishing out these monster buckets of stale popcorn. Well, when you get it, you're going to eat it. All right? So just change the situation. Sometimes I think customer experience issues that we encounter, we overanalyze. And sometimes it can be a simple change of the situation that leads to a better outcome for the customer. And I think as customer experience professionals, the closer we get to the business, become a little more savvy about how the other functions in the business operate, the better we'll be able to prescribe situational changes like that.
Yeah, it also reminds me of the size of the portions that you get at certain restaurants, too. I was thinking about kind of my own experiences where I've seen some improvement over time. I've traveled a lot in business, which I know you have too, but over time, the hotels and the rental cars have really gotten a lot better in terms of their check-in process and speed, and yet the airlines still just can't seem to get there. But, Uber and Lyft is a big advantage in particular cities over trying to get a cab or trying to get a ride on public transportation. So what are some other examples you've seen where organizations have actually really effectively made change happen that was good for their customers?
I'll tell you a recent example, and this is with a client called SKF, a manufacturer of ball bearings that have application of those ball bearings in lots of different contexts.
Race cars,
industrial applications. It sounds simple, the business, but the more you understand it, the more complex you realize it is. And so
anything that's got a tire, right? Basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Freedom of movement, lots of moving parts mechanically and all kinds of things. And so we are leveraging and leverage with SKF a process that was developed by Google, specifically in Google Ventures and an individual named Jake Knapp. It's called Sprint. Sprint is a specific technique with specific tools associated with it, but all related to common design thinking principles. Okay, and so SKF was challenged with delivery notifications. When an order and an originally committed to delivery date was going to change, communicating with customers as to how that change and what the impact would be on the delivery date was difficult. I mean, you think about all these different custom and standard ball bearings that are being manufactured that require multiple supply chains in order to deliver raw material. There's lots of complexities in that. And so it sounds simple, but when you dig into it, it's actually a really hard issue to solve. Okay, so they had this particular issue. They brought that topic to us, and we said this was a perfect application to leverage Sprint. And Sprint is a technique we are using in lots of different cases to facilitate change. And I think it's effective because it deals with the three components of change that we talked about, which are the rational, the emotional, and the situational. So Sprint, in its essence, and what we did with SKF is it's a 5-day process. Okay, the first part of the process is to get all the issues out on the table. That's what you're doing day one. So you're appealing to the rational side of the brain, which is we need to analyze this. We need to understand it in depth so that we can root cause it and then get to the right solution. Then you start to get into more the emotional side, and you are sketching once the issues have been emerged and discussed and root causes pinpointed, you start sketching solutions. That's day two. And they don't have to be obviously perfect solutions, but that moves us into day three, where we are taking the best components of all the sketch solutions and putting them together. We're debating all the best elements, what could work, what might not work, and we're merging them together to begin to identify what an ideal solution would look like. Part of the beauty of the process is it brings a cross-functional team together to do this. And I think part of what we have seen over time is that when people are engaged in building the solution, they're more inclined to accept the outcome. They're motivated to make it work, which alludes to that emotional side of change that's necessary. Once you decide on the components, then day 4 is all about prototyping. Let's build a prototype. This doesn't have to be a perfect prototype, but something that is tangible enough that you can take it to customers and get input on it.
You actually do that in the sprint?
You do it in the
Wow.
sprint.
Okay.
So you're getting input on the prototype that you develop, and you're testing some of your assumptions directly with customers and getting feedback so you can refine that prototype and get it down the stage to something more tangible. So we did this with SKF in a 5-day process on a topic they were struggling with for a long time. And in 5 days, we got to a prototype solution that they could go out and test with customers. And they continued to get input and refine it, but they are headed down the path of delivering a more effective delivery change date notification to customers, which is important if you think about these industrial applications. People who have equipment running on these ball bearings, they want to know when that stuff is coming so they can plan accordingly. In their manufacturing process, there's revenue at stake and how much they're producing out of that. So they're dependent on that piece of information in order to facilitate their own revenue generation process. So this is big for SKF.
Yeah, it's a great story, and the sprint process just sounds fantastic. Maybe we ought to do a podcast just on that alone.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned for that, CX podcast listeners. I think great process. In fact, I was noting that the sprint process really only has 1 day on the rational, and the rest of it is really situational, emotional. I hope our listeners will challenge their use of the emotional and situational and try to trade out some of the rational for that. If you want to talk about anything we discussed today or follow up with Noah, would you tell our listeners how they might be able to get a hold of you?
Sure. Telephone directly is 317-843-8534. You can reach out to me over email, ngrayson@walkerinfo.com. I'm also on all the social media sites, so feel free to contact me through those avenues.
Thanks. And if you want to talk about anything else we discussed or anything that we've had on prior podcasts, I hope you can feel free to reach out to me, steve.walker@walkerinfo.com, or here in the U.S., 317-843-8890. I, too, am on social media. Don't hesitate to reach out to Noah, myself, or any of the other fine people here at Walker. We'd love to talk to you more about your CX program. If you're listening to this episode before 1 p.m. Eastern on July 26, we want to invite you to watch our live webcast on this subject. Go to our website, walkerinfo.com/webcast, to sign up. Noah will be one of the presenters, and you'll have a chance to ask questions and gain more insight into change management. If you're listening after July 26, don't fret. We'll have a recording of the webcast posted on our website. Don't forget to subscribe to the CX Leader podcast. You can go to walkerinfo.com/podcast, and you'll find the links to iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play. And we've started posting our podcast to our YouTube channel as well. You can find those at youtube.com/walkerinformation. Thanks to our loyal listeners for helping us get access to all of these vehicles for the content to be distributed. The CX Leader podcast is a production of Walker. We're a business consulting firm that can help you use your customer experience as your biggest competitive advantage. Find out more at walkerinfo.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.